So as we continue on these basic principles about how we communicate with people in our world, people who are churched, less churched, never churched, those people that we meet every day, people that are just part of the daily experience of our lives. You know them, you know who they are. I don't. I've got them in my life. I know who they are in my life, and you know who they are in yours. One of the principles that we really do need to think about, if we're going to connect with these people, is to make sure that we speak in a language they understand. It's funny, a while ago I'd preached at a church for a week, and at the end of the week I was sitting in at Starbucks with the pastor and his wife. We were just having a coffee to kind of celebrate the end of the week, and we were sitting there, and as we were, a young couple came and joined. It was actually the pastor's daughter and her boyfriend, and they were both about 19 years of age, and this was in Mississippi, and we were sitting there around this Starbucks table just talking for a while, and I'd been talking with this young guy for about 30 minutes. We've been having a conversation about different things. He liked cars, especially Mustang cars. He was a big Mustang fan, and we were talking. And after about 30 minutes of talking, he said to me, and this was a serious question, he said, "I've got a question for you." I said, "What's that?" He said, "What language do y'all speak in England?" It was a serious question. What language do y'all speak in England? And I looked at him and I thought, is he serious? But I said, well, let me give you a clue. England, English. It kind of, there's a connection, you know, England, English. And he looked at me and he smiled and he said, the look on his face was just a picture. He kind of went, and it was like this whole big thing going on in his mind where the penny was dropping that people from England speak English. And when we carried on and we began to talk about how, even though we do speak the same language, there are some things that we say that are a little bit different. And there are lots of English phrases or words that we use that Americans struggle with. I mean, for example, in our car, we put things in the boot of our car. And I think you put them in the trunk. And I often say to people, I need to put something in the boot. And they think, why would you put that in your boot? A boot is what you put on the end of your foot to wear. And of course, we think a trunk is what an elephant has and all that kind of thing. And I often ask people to collect me if I'm in a hotel and someone's going to be coming to pick me up, as you say. I say, could you collect me at 9:30? And they say, what do you mean collect you? Do you mean pick you up? That's it. That's what I mean. Pick me up. And I've noticed in some parts of the United States, people often say they're fixing to do something. And I think, fixing to do what? I mean, what are they fixing? Why don't they just do it? Why do they have to fix it before they do it? And I could go on and on and on. There are so many different ways that we just use words because they're the words that we use. I was in Alabama once, and this was so strange as well. I was with a pastor friend of mine. His name's Rex, and we were watching football. Now, the word football, for example, when you use the word football in the United States, what you mean is your football. You mean, which I think is funny, you mean football where the people don't use their foot, they use their hand. That's what always makes me laugh about your football. You call it football, and they spend all their time throwing it. Whereas in our football in England, the word football, you call it soccer, but we call it football. The word football doesn't mean that. The word football means a ball and people kick it with their foot, hence it's called football. But here is my friend Rex, Kent his name, is trying to explain to me football, your football, and all the different rules and what was happening. And it was so funny because he was watching his team, Auburn, playing, and he was explaining the rules to me at the same time. And it was just a great experience because he kept trying to explain things to me, but at the same time he was getting passionate about this game and shouting and screaming at the TV and then trying to explain to me what was happening. And to be honest with you, he got so lost in his passion, I didn't have the first idea most of the time what he was actually talking about in terms of what these rules really are. You see, whatever it is that we do in our lives, whatever we become familiar with, whatever thing we get into, whatever it is, whatever organisation, whatever sport, whatever hobby, whatever thing, every group, every club, every kind of thing, everything gets a language that the people that do it become accustomed to. They just get used to it. They understand what it means. It's just a part of their lives. And it becomes almost impossible for us to imagine what it would be like not to understand that. So I could give you a whole bunch of phrases, for example, from English football, that you wouldn't have the first idea what I meant. But I know exactly what they mean because I've been brought up in a country where that's our sport, that's what we play, and we use those words every single day of our lives. And here's the thing, when it comes to explaining our faith to people, sometimes we find it almost impossible to think, how do we explain this to people without using words that we're familiar with? Because we become so familiar with words that we know what they mean, and we think, well, surely everybody knows what these things mean. But the reality is they don't know what they mean because they've never been part of that world where they've found out what they mean. I remember a few years ago I was driving past a church. It was in North Carolina, and I had to stop and take a photograph because outside of this church they had a billboard with some words on it as a kind of just a bunch of words. And this is what it said on this board. It said, "Are you ready to be saved? Then come inside." That's what it said. "Are you ready to be saved? Then come inside." And as I drove by, I took the photograph of it because I thought, well, it did two things for me that time. The first thing it did was it made me think, and if you're not ready to be saved, does that mean you stay outside? But the other thing I thought was, because of where I come from in Britain, I thought most people in my country, if they saw a sign that said, "Are you ready to be saved?" they wouldn't have the first idea what it was talking about because they don't use that language. They don't use those words. It's not part of their jargon. They don't know what being saved means. They think that saving is something you do in the bank. You know, you put your money into a bank and save money. Or often in my country, they think that being saved is what happens to a football when it's pushed around the post and it goes out for a corner, but because the goalkeeper saved it. They don't think about being saved from their sins. It's not part of their vocabulary. I remember also years ago in Britain, an organisation made a video series about how we share our faith. And one of the things they talked about was the language that they use. And they had this great little skit, and in this skit they had, I think it was a plumber who was fixing somebody's washing machine and having a conversation about Jesus. And in this conversation, the plumber asks the person, "Are you washed in the blood?" And it was just so funny because the look on the person's face when they were asked, "Are you washed in the blood?" they didn't have the first idea what he was talking about. Washed in the blood. What on earth does that mean to somebody that's never been to church, knows nothing about Jesus, and who's never understood that because of Jesus' death and the shedding of his blood, we can have our sins forgiven? See, every organisation, not just the church, but every organisation creates its jargon. It creates its way of expressing things. And people that are part of that organisation, people that have belonged there for a long time, become so familiar with it. As I said just a while ago, we can't imagine people not understanding those words. But here's the truth. In your world, people that you're trying to reach, people that work in your office, in your factory, in your school, college, whatever, people that live in your street, some of them are churched even, but certainly the less churched and the never churched people, they don't know what these words mean. They haven't the first idea what we're talking about. And we can't think they should know, because why should they know? Any more than if you went to some of the things that they do in their lives that you're not familiar with, why would you know what they were talking about? And so if we're going to reach these people, if we're going to help them to understand the truth about Jesus, then what we need to learn to do is to talk about our faith in such a way that it makes sense to people that don't go to church. And here's a couple of things we could do. Firstly, and I think this is a really good discipline for us to do as Christians, is to work hard at trying to explain Bible truth to people who don't understand it. For years, what I used to do, and I found it really helpful, was I would write down some of the big truths of the Bible. And then underneath the truth, I'd actually try to write in my own words, what does that mean? What does that really mean? In a way that I could understand it and communicate it to somebody else. And I challenge you to think about doing that. Could you do that? And the other thing which I think is really important with this is if you really want to learn a language, if you really want to understand the way people speak, the way to do it, the best way, the only way really to do it, is actually to live among them. For example, where I live in Europe, if you want to learn French, you can learn it in a classroom, you can go to French studies and everything else, and you can read French books. But the way to learn French is to go to France and live there for a while and be with people and just become part of the conversation. That's how you really learn a language. A lot of people go to Germany, the same thing to learn German. That's how you learn a language. It's how we learned language. When we were children, nobody taught us how to speak. We just picked it up. It became part of how we learned how to speak and communicate. And I do genuinely believe this. If we really want to learn how to communicate the truths of the Bible to people that aren't familiar with them, we won't do that in a classroom. We won't do that by being taught how to say it. we'll only do it by actually taking time to engage with them, get in conversation with them, find out who they are and what's going on in their lives, and then as we talk about what we believe, let them ask us, what do you mean? What are you talking about? And then try to answer their questions. I think it does two things. Firstly, it helps them to understand. Secondly, I think it helps us to really begin to grasp in a deeper way, what does this faith really mean? What actually do I mean when I talk about these words that I'm so familiar with? So, here's my question for you. Are you prepared to do what it takes to make sure that people understand what you're talking about?